Good morning and welcome to those of you here in the Center for the Arts and those of you joining us via live stream to today's installment of our ongoing Thayer Global Speaker Series. This series is designed to further bring the world to Thayer, to inspire us with the ideas and perspectives of thought leaders and difference makers. It is a forum for discovery, scholarship, dialogue, and debate. And today, we are incredibly fortunate to experience and share in discovery and dialogue with two remarkable, accomplished individuals and leaders. In a moment, I will turn the conversation over to our own scholar in residence here at Thayer and Harvard University faculty member, Dr. Tim McCarthy. But before I do that, let me say a few words about Professor Juliette Kayyem, our guest, who joins Dr. McCarthy on stage today. Professor Kayyem is an international leader in crisis management and homeland security. Professor Kayyem serves as the faculty chair of the Homeland Security and Security and Global Health Projects at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Previously, she served as President Obama's Assistant Secretary at the Department of Homeland Security and as Mass Governor Deval Patrick's Homeland Security Advisor. Professor Kayyem is also a CNN national security analyst, Pulitzer Prize finalist, and contributing writer to The Atlantic, as well as Boston's local NPR station, GBH. In addition to all of this and more, Professor Kayyem is the author or editor of 6 books, including her most recent, The Devil Never Sleeps. Thank you. Learning to Live in an Age of Disasters, which was described in a New Yorker profile of Professor Kayyem as an engagingly urgent blueprint for rethinking our approach to disaster preparedness and response. Dr. McCarthy, Professor Kayyem, thank you so much for being here with us today. I hand it over to you.
Juliette, how are you?
Hello.
It's great to see you. We just came down from Cambridge. We're here in Braintree. It's wonderful.
I'm getting a ride back with him because I never get to see
We
him.
are. My car's not clean.
Okay.
FYI. One of the things I wanted to say from the outset, we got a whole bunch of wonderful questions, mostly from students here. And so in the course of this conversation, I'm going to weave some of them and I'll make sure I name check the folks. Yeah, I'll make sure I give credit where credit's due. But we won't have a formal sort of Q&A at the end because so many of these questions are shaped by the questions that you submitted. So let me just jump right in here.
I'm gonna there's no like build up.
No, my car's not clean. That was the build up. Okay. I want to begin with something that you said at the beginning of The Devil Never Sleeps, learning to live in an age of disaster. You said, I should probably admit here that my immediate obsession with the search for that you talked about the prologue is a consequence of the pandemic's manipulation of our time, of the concept of time. And then you go on to say, my career in disaster and crisis management, preparing public and private entities for what they least expected was in demand. Whether in academia, government, media, or the private sector, I like to say I've had many jobs, but one career. Yeah. I am like a storm chaser, but for disasters in general. I have a reputation for remaining calm when others do not. And my mantra has always been to pace the rage. I have low blood pressure, literally and figuratively. So you call yourself, and I've heard you say this before, a disaster chaser. So I want to open by asking you, how does one get into that line of work?
What's a girl like me doing at a tornado like this? So hi, everyone. First of all, nice to see you all. I'm thrilled to be here and thank you for the invitation, everyone, to this great event. So I should say I started off in counterterrorism. I was a counterterrorism lawyer at the Department of Justice in 1995. I'm aging myself. From 1995 to about 2000. I was in DC. We moved here back up to Cambridge in 2000. There were 14 counterterrorism cases or terrorism cases in all of the United States in that period. It wasn't considered, a pressing issue. We had, of course, had the Oklahoma City attack, but the foreign terrorism threat that I was focused focused on wasn't viewed as serious by those outside, right? So I'm in it. We then start to run around with our hair on fire, so to speak, by 98, 99. I'm serving 1998, 99. I'm serving on the National Commission on Terrorism. This is one of those congressional commissions, those of you who remember or you're studying at this stage, 9/11, that basically is formed because no one wants to deal with the problem. And the problem, of course, is that Osama bin Laden was different. In counterterrorism, we used to say terrorists want a lot of people watching, but not a lot of people dead. They had a political pursuit. Think of Cuban terrorists or others, Irish. If you kill too many people, then people won't support your cause. That had changed, and we knew it had changed because of bin Laden. And then found myself here. I should say the course credit. So that was sort of starting off with like bad things happen, right, in terms of my career. But I came through it through the legal route. The other course correction in my career, although I've had, as I said, many jobs in and out of government and media and academia, was in 2005. Many of us in counterterrorism spent about 2001 to 2005 sort of focused on, sort of crudely put, like stopping 19 guys from getting on 4 airplanes, right? I mean, your focus was on, we cannot have that kind of catastrophic event again. And many of you will remember in 2005, or I guess as you study now, we lost close to 2,000 Americans because we couldn't save a U.S. city from drowning. That's New Orleans and Hurricane Katrina. And I think it was watching the images that I thought something is really wrong, and I became less interested in the particular threat, terrorism, cyber, pandemic, natural disaster, and became much more focused in government once I went back into government and then out in sort of how do you prepare for the inevitable, what I call in the book, the boom, or that the devil will arrive again and again and again. I mean that positively, like I'm not a fatalist. It is, we can prepare for this better. Or as I say in the book, we can learn to fail safer. In other words, we sort of accept that bad things will happen. How do we fail safer?
Yeah. It's interesting because, as you know, I'm a historian. So, I mean, one of the things that we do as historians by definition is calculate or analyze change over time.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think, and we also make sweeping sort of proclamations about
Exactly.
ages and eras.
Yes, exactly.
And, the subtitle of your book is Learning to Live in an Age of Disasters. And so I wanted to ask you why this is an age of disasters. There's almost an inevitability. You just said that word, right? That this is what we live with. And this is an age of disasters, which makes it seem to me, at least, that you're making a distinction between what came before and what we're dealing with now.
I think that's right. Well, that is right. I mean, some of it is qualitative, just sort of how do we feel our connectedness to each other, so that, whatever you think about the origins of COVID, whatever happened in China, ends up not being an isolated case of a bad virus or whatever, whether it's a lab or it's the market. I'm a proponent of the market theory, that sweeps across the globe, that by within 7 weeks, we're in lockdown. Right. So you're just the way people work, the way people move and the way things move. So even think about a cyber attack, 3 guys, in Russia basically can bring down our half of our distribution system when they do a ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline just a few years ago. So that's one reason, is the connectivity makes us more. I use the age of disasters because I do think it's time bound it's not time bound on the future end. But one thing about climate, though, which is a key theme of this, is it is just scientifically true. One can debate the origins or the reasons why. I don't think you can debate them for very long. It is just qualitatively true that the magnitude of what you would call climate events, climate catastrophes, is just changing in frequency, in scope, and then in the price tag. And so I was in the Obama administration. We thought it was a big deal that one year we had 3 $1 billion disasters, right? That seemed like a big deal. Like, okay, things are really bad. So it's March or April of 2023. I think we already have had two, like $1 billion. I mean, and think about Hurricane Ian, which hit Florida. I think you're looking at a $50 to $60 billion price tag there. So we really do need to think about, are we building right? How should we rebuild? Should we even live in certain places and stuff?
Right.
So it's the idea that you're never, what animated me, and I tell an anecdote of sort of connecting me to the Spanish flu from 1917 to 1919. We learned during COVID that my home in Cambridge, Massachusetts, actually was really hit during the third wave, not the first or the second. There was a third wave in 1919. We learned during the pandemic, long story, that an area on our third floor, we live in an old, what I call an old cranky house in Cambridge, was the what's called the sick room for a young woman who had passed away from the Spanish flu. And it was that connectivity that really got me thinking about this book, about sort of, we can, look at how bad things are and say, why are we that way? And things are horrible. And why didn't we do this? Or we can talk about a future that honestly will never come, of unicorns and rainbows. And why don't we just wish for a better world? And the point of my work now is actually, we're just here, like, this is it. And you can wish for a better time or dream. You can wish for a better past and dream of a better future. And I want you all to do that. My job, and through various things, is that each chapter ends with, you are here.
Yeah.
You're at, and what we call in disaster management, we call it the boom. So there's left of boom, all the things you try to do to stop the bad thing from happening, and then right of boom, all the things you do all the things you do in consequence of that bad thing happening. The boom is agnostic. The devil's agnostic, right? I mean, he is coming.
Right. And but the devil is multifaceted,
Yes,
right?
yes,
So one of the things that came up in a number of these questions, and I wanted to dig into this a bit with you, are the different types of disasters, right? So you have on the one hand something like 9/11, right? A terrorist attack, the marathon bombing, right? Something that's a terrorist attack. You have a cyber attack, right? The connectivity and the cyber security piece. You have natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina, right? All of the increase in the number of those kinds of things. So school shootings, right?
Yeah.
These are not all, and then COVID.
Yeah.
Right. Those are all very different kinds of devils and disasters. So in your work, do you kind of conflate them? Do you create meaningful distinctions between them? Is there a difference in approach, both to the right and to the left of those different booths? It's a great
question. Whoever asked it, and or all of you who asked it, there were a bunch of questions like this. So in the New Yorker profile, the reporter was great. She asked a question, well, what's the difference between being paranoid and being prepared? And I just instinctively said perfection. I don't seek perfection. I think the way we need to think about it, because otherwise you'll just either you'll be paralyzed into doing nothing, or you'll become a prepper. And we don't want either of those things. What I'm trying to do is find a lane for planners, for individuals, for leaders, in between what I call tuning out and freaking out, right? There's got to be a lane. Let's find that lane between being so fearful of everything. You're like, I don't want to hear any of it. Or freaking out because you're getting your risk calculation wrong. So I have this 80% rule, which is this. What I looked at is disasters. The oldest disasters or crises is I have little vignettes from all different periods that you would recognize. So I go from the Trojan horse to Surfside. Remember, Surfside is the apartment complex in Florida that just collapsed, and we were learning that a lot of it had to do with the changing environment and the salt in the air that was destroying a building that had been not built ready for that. And what I would look for is the connective tissue. And I think in that way, you can then begin to assert agency over these things, because they start to, I hate to say it, but they start to look familiar. Each tragedy is different. Each victim needs to be honored and remembered for who they are. So I don't mean to be to sound, like I think in bulk, right? That's the problem with we think in bulk, but like, but each individual is also a story that ties to the past and the future. And like a historian, that's what I try to do, not to say, okay, here's what happened, but to say, I can get from all of these stories, in this case, 8 lessons, 8 things that that will help you fail safer at the moment of the boom. I can't help you stop the boom. That's the intelligence people, the planners, the cyber security specialists, all of those. And I'm not particularly good at, at the sort of thinking about the unicorn and rainbow world. I'm glad those people exist too. But as my husband says, I want you on the Titanic, like that is just, but what I want to do is I want all of you to be ready, because those 8 lessons get you 80% of the way there. The other 20% will be particular. In terrorism, I will say the difference is obviously there were probably more hints that something was happening. And I do a lot for CNN, in particular on school shootings. The particular motivation of the shooter sort of interests me less now, because I think they're both all the same, and then each of them is slightly different, right? But I do think what we do know now is there were so many clues that person was leaving, whether it was a family member or whatever they were posting. We find this most recently in Nashville. And in some ways, maybe their ability to stop those things could be better. That will get you the 20%.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, I'm thinking that there are a couple of questions here about schools and about climate change. And one question comes from Max Hughes, which is, can you discuss the causes of the increase in natural disasters in this time? And then there's another question that Matt Dunn, as a teacher here, said, are the differences between preparing for sudden disasters like a 9/11 or COVID or a school shooting, and the slow moving disasters of climate change. And the reason why I bring that up, and also the school shooting thing, is that there are things we can do to slow the pace of the planet warming and what we're doing to it. And there are certainly policy changes and interventions that we can do to at least slow or to intervene in the quick acquisition of guns and the use of them. And so I'm wondering, like, for someone like you who's engaged, I mean, you have enough on your plate. Obviously, you have a big portfolio and you're a policy person. But so how much do you inform or advocate for those kinds of things that we know could at least slow down?
Yeah. So it's funny. I mean, this is sort of more when you think about your career or what kind of career you want. I think I've been successful if I can say so, in my lane, because I stick to my lane. Like now I have a platform. If you see me on TV or if I write for The Atlantic, it's clear I will use every opportunity to talk about a certain kind of weaponry. I'm not going to get into the Second Amendment debate. I am not going to get into the court debate. But all I know, and this gets to planning, is one of the things I do at the beginning of the book is, what is a crisis, right? I mean, we all say it all the time. There's the cancer crisis and the climate crisis and the crisis of our mental health and what. So we define a crisis in my field as probably different than we tend to use it. So a crisis is a disruption to the core capabilities of your institution, right? So it's not a scandal. It's not the CEO going off with the mistress or whatever. Like, institutions can survive that. I don't like it, but institutions can survive that. It is TJ Maxx, a company I worked with over COVID, having to a large retailer having to close all of its stores. That's your crisis, right? You literally don't have a business model, or schools having to close, right? You're now not in person. So it's a disruption to your core capabilities that comes at a moment of surprise. So whether it's a slow roll or a slow roll, or what we call an acute crisis, at some moment there's a before and after. And then here's the most important part, and so it gets to this, is your ability to respond is limited in time. And that makes it different. And we teach at a school of public policy. So what I tell my students, I teach the crisis management course, the tools available in crisis and disaster response are different than your public policy tools. There are tools. I mean, that's what it's a field of study. It's not just reacting or things that you can do, but it is different than say, I don't call it the climate change crisis. Climate change is a public policy problem. It's an acute one. It is a serious one. Let's use the tools of public policy. What can government do? What can private sector do? Whatever, to try to mitigate the hurricane, the tornadoes that we saw this weekend. Those are the disasters. And just ending to conceptually, this is like the one part of the book that my kids really liked. My kids, two are in college and one's still in high school. When your ability to respond is limited in time, like you gotta be ready to close it down, move kids out of the way of a harm, whatever it is. You only really have two options. One is be ready at the boom. That's what I do, right? What do you wish you had at that moment of the boom, knowing we can't stop it? The other is, and this gets to your thing, is extend the runway. It's conceptually just a way to think about it. Can you just buy yourself more time? And how do you do that? So to school shooting, which all of you, because I have kids and I have kids that went through high school in the most recent years and one's still there. When you think about a school shooting, you want to do everything you can to stop the shooter. But if I have a limited amount of time, there's two things I want to do, right? I want to limit the amount of harm that a weapon can do in that period of time. And two, I want to give law enforcement or those who can help as much time as possible to stop it. And so if you just, whatever your feelings are about guns or gun control, whatever, and the country's less divided than you would think about this, about a particular kind of car. But if you think of the AR series, AR-15, that's the problem with it, right? Is that you could do a lot of damage in a short period of time. Damage is not the right word. You kill. No one. Nashville is the right example. You know, the 6 who perished, no one went to the hospital. You were either dead or alive. Like there's no, like, it's not like a hurricane where, you know, you can maybe survive, you know, you can survive with some damage. And so what you want to do is, you know, because you need to buy time, right? Until you can stop this boom. So that's how I think about things like weapons or even climate change. I just want to buy time and extend that runway so that I can fail safer. The more time I have, the more options that will be available. That's what, honestly, that's what flattening the curve was. We tend to forget that. We were just buying time, right? We were just staying inside until we knew more. And then when we knew it was respiratory, and then when we got a vaccine, think about it. That's what it was. You had the high arc, and remember that graph everyone knew? You were flattening the curve. You were extending the runway. We were just buying time. And that's the way to think about it.
Yeah. One of the things that is striking, again, I'm thinking historically, the Department of Homeland Security or the departments of Homeland Security are a post 9/11 phenomenon, right? And so there's a history, there's an origin and evolution story. And there's a question here from Matthew Miller, who said, how did you respond to the Boston Marathon bombings in 2013, given that you were the Homeland Security advisor for Deval Patrick, but the first Homeland Security advisor for Deval Patrick. So this was a relatively new governmental agency and infrastructure.
It's fun. So this is like when you think about your careers, you know, I get students who are grad students and they just like, you know, and then this year and then that year, I mean, Tim and I will laugh at that. You know,
the strategic plans for their lives.
Yes, exactly. Is you meet people and they want to live somewhere else, or you decide to stay home for a couple of years with kids. Like what? Like you cannot map it out now. And I always tell young people, like, never take a job to get a job, never do a thing to get another thing. It just, it becomes obvious. And like, maybe I'm just old and cranky, but like life is too short. Like I love what I do, despite all the bad news. There are good days and bad days and annoying days and not annoying days. And like this idea that you can like strategically plan it out. But I am a Massachusetts resident because I met a guy and he got a teaching job here. I could be all feminist about it, but it was like that simple, right? And
he's a good guy.
He's a good guy. The kids are good. So we're not upset.
It's a win-win, I think.
You build your career around that, right? And so the mapping becomes like less like sort of significant. So I say this because how did I get where I was? So my first boss, was Deval Patrick at the Department of Justice. He was
That's
an
right.
assistant secretary, assistant
Civil Rights Division.
assistant, what do they call them?
Assistant Attorney General
Assistant
for
Attorney
Civil
General,
Rights.
right,
Yeah.
for civil rights. And so he was my boss because the terrorism cases had civil rights implications. We stay in touch. He's a tremendous person and leader, and I
Now
love
our
him to
colleague.
death. Yeah, and now a colleague. Fast forward, many years later, I'm in this field. He comes to my house. I mean, he has like a name recognition of like 0.02%. He says, I'm thinking of running for governor. I think I like burst out laughing. I was like, okay, I'm behind you. I love you to death. I mean, he then becomes governor. And because of 9/11, the governors are all required to have a homeland security advisor. So he calls me and I'm like, I would view this as a compliment if I thought you knew anyone else in the field. But like, I mean, because that wasn't his thing. He was a civil rights attorney and Hope, he was like the first Hope person. Obama.
He wasn't the first.
No, but you know what I mean? Like before Obama, there was Deval Patrick, who really ran on this idea that we were going to turn the corner on a wartime America, right? That remember, you don't remember 9/11 to 2008. There was like only one narrative. So I oversee Boston Marathon planning and preparedness, but I'm gone I'm now with Obama, President Obama, by the time of the Boston Marathon bombings, and I had just left the administration. So my role was, I knew everyone and everything about the planning because that's what we did. We learned to fail safer, right? In other words, you can look at the Boston Marathon and say, how did we not stop the brothers? And I know there's connections of this school and people are running, and God love you. I ran it once and never again. It is, and what you're doing it for, but you can focus on how do we not stop it from happening, and we should, but you can also focus on the sort of response capabilities that allowed a city to, and this is the statistic people in my field remember, 297 people were taken to area hospitals. If you made it to a hospital, you lived. Those are not statistics you generally see, but in other words, you either see everyone or no one, or some 297 people who, and some of them with traumatic. I think we had 18 amputations. Like that is not luck. That is not a mood. That is planning. And so my role that day actually ended up, CNN and the Boston Globe. Just because I had this expertise that most people didn't have, which is what is happening. Like, who are these people? What are they doing? What's going to happen next? All that stuff, which I just know because I've been in the field long enough.
Right. And there another question's about what's happening now and so how things have evolved.
Yeah.
Right? So one question here from Elena Mulhern is, in what areas do you find the average American or American government lacking in disaster preparedness, and how do we improve this? And then another question is, from Virginia Thompson, what are some things you might change about the current government structure to better anticipate a response?
Yeah.
So this is a question about what we can do, but also what government is doing, but also could do better.
Yeah. So I think, I'm a big fan of personal preparedness. So I think if you thought like so we have a line, there's a line, giving you all the lines that we use is, 9 meals until anarchy is the 9 meals separate mankind from anarchy. It's an old philosophical term, but it's basically the sense that 3 days is all one has after a catastrophe before things go really bad. And the term, is often used in other countries. So think about the Haiti earthquake, which I worked. So Haiti suffers an earthquake. There's one, which I write about in the book, there's one runway for the entire country, which is devastated by this earthquake in 2010. You have to prioritize. And there are things that you will not like deprioritizing. For example, orphan children, right? They became less of a priority. What do you need to prioritize? Water and food. And that's why 10,000 U.S. Army members are sent, 20,000, U.S. military members are deployed first. Because when you only have one runway, you just have to make those calculations. So the Haitians have a term, and it's not about the victims, it's just a way to think about how you would structure a life. And this is the empowerment part. Like, we have agency, we're human beings, we have agency. And the Haitians have a term called stupid deaths. I have to be careful. This is not meant to say those who died are stupid. Stupid deaths are the deaths that occur that did not need to occur, but for the lack of ability to respond. So most people in hurricanes now do not die from hurricanes. They die from carbon monoxide poisoning because of generators that are misused because they get carbon monoxide. The same is true of blizzards. When you hear about blizzards deaths, those are generally not because of the snow. They're what we call like, if only that person knew how to use that or whatever. So my big thing is we have a capacity, once again, agency, to extend our own runway for help. You all are younger, you know, tell your parents I say this, but it's essentially extending the runway, right? Because if people in our situations where we have the resources or we have the time or the capability don't do it, we're going to put more pressure on very limited services that happen in a thing. So think about why a governor calls. I know we love it. I was actually part of the team that called state snow days, so I had a tremendous power over my children. And you know, think about snow days. Why are those happening? It's you know, obviously it's to protect first responders and get people. But the reason why snow days started to be called, and sometimes early and sometimes incorrectly, is if you look at the blizzard, this is why we study disasters, right? If you look at the blizzard of 1977, over 100.
I got stuck in a snowdrift.
Well, so you're lucky.
Child.
So you're like one of the stories. So close to 100 people died in that blizzard. But so we say, oh, 100 people died in the blizzard. So you all have some idea. They all died of snow, right? Or they got cold or, you know, in the blizzard. When we study disasters, because how people died matters, right? Because that's how we learn to do better. So 71 of those deaths were in cars. The pipes get frozen, the carbon monoxide pushes into the car. So if you're a governor, you know exactly how to save people's lives. Call the snow day, get everyone off the streets. You have now saved lives. You do not get credit for it. In fact, people get mad at you if you called it too soon, but that's why that's being done. And so that's what we do. On the second question, just quickly on the what would you do differently, or how would you
could be done differently?
I'm a big fan. So when you say what kind of policy debates do I get in? So we have a disaster relief system in the United States. What policy change? If I could do one thing, policy-wise, there's things I would do crisis management-wise. I could do one thing policy-wise. We have an expectation in this country that when bad things happen, the U.S. government, this is where I sound less democratic than I am, the U.S. government writes a check because we want people to rebuild and go back and, you know, do all the things that we want to do. So Plum Island, some of you will know it. Maybe some of you even visit there. Plum Island is an island in North Massachusetts. It's like, you know, every year, the same houses, like, oh, look, water in my house on an island, like as if this is going to stop. And we have a disaster relief system in which the government will just pay people. We need to start putting conditions on that money now. It is ridiculous that we are paying people to rebuild in fire zones without, I don't mean you have to vacate the place. It just, you got to build with a certain material. You have to, you're not allowed to, you have to have certain things around the house. You know, we give money to cities and don't make them do resilient planning, right? So I am pretty hardcore that the disaster system the disaster system that we built when we could convince ourselves that disasters were random and rare, and those poor people, those poor people who got devastated in the crisis, let's give them a check and they can rebuild. That cannot hold. You've got $1 billion disasters essentially every month, minimum 1 billion. We cannot sustain this.
Yeah, that's right. So I want to shift, if you will, to politics for a second.
Happening?
Talking, well,
happening?
Yes.
I'm on hold. I have
I
the role
know.
with CNN where they say, can you be camera ready just in case there's a riot? I'm like, this is a good docket for me. So
Yeah.
I think everything's fine.
And I got off Twitter. So there's
Exactly.
yeah,
That's good.
So I want to ask you a question about politics. One way that we're connected in lots of ways.
Yeah.
We're colleagues and friends and so forth. But I was a delegate
Yes.
for you when
From
you
a
were
short-lived
you were
political.
a gubernatorial candidate. I was when Maura Healey became the
AG.
nominee for the AG. And so I want to ask you a question that just occurred to me, that you tried to run for governor.
Yeah.
You ran for governor and you weren't successful, but that was something that that was another act that you would have done if you'd been elected. And I'm wondering, given the fact that you've worked so closely with elected officials, governors, presidents, right, folks like that, and I've also worked with lots of elected officials, right? In what ways would that role, if you were to run for office and win, would that role enable or facilitate your work, and in what ways would it constrain or limit?
So I should say, so this was 2000. Oh my God, I'm aging us. 2012. It was a long time ago. Yeah, I'd left the Obama administration. It's a really interesting time here. Well, I'll talk just crude politics.
Check the pictures on our iPhone.
Yeah, exactly. It was a time before we were more comfortable with women running against other women. So I took on Martha Coakley, who was the Attorney General. She had lost a Senate race. And she was running again. There were 5 people in the race. Only one of them was viewed as she had to get out of the race.
That's right.
Which was me. Because you younger women, and whatever your experience was. So those of you who know politics, I am the first candidate that Emily's List has ever endorsed, because Martha Coakley was not in, who they then unendorsed. It was a different time. Now we're used to women running against each other. It's like sort of common, and at least in primaries. But then it wasn't. That's how much a decade changes. Yeah, do you remember?
Yeah,
Scars.
vividly.
You can imagine that phone call. It's like, wait, you asked me to get in the race. I will say, on a personal level, I was always curious about elected office. I think if you are curious about it, there's no other way to find out whether you would like it than doing it. You can talk yourself out of it forever. But I didn't leave the campaign thinking, honestly, I wanted to do it again. It is a different kind of beast. It is a good beast. I mean, I urge people to run at whatever level. It just wasn't, I don't know if because it was so hard, it just wasn't for me. I also think for Massachusetts, I'm probably talking brass politics, I'm probably too conservative for the primary. That public safety, Democrat, homeland security, like that's what those people do. Like
Bush and Cheney do.
Well, it's like, people would ask me like my immigration policy. I was like, I'm running for gov. Like I know one thing about the Constitution, like I'm not allowed to have an immigration policy, right? That and so, but I think part of that was just my narrative. So I think what I am, what I do. I do a lot of work with the public sector, in particular through COVID. I was through the Bloomberg Cities program, which is a program at the Kennedy School. I spent 14 weeks with over 400 mayors, just walking them through what they had to do next, and all by Zoom, and because everything was on the local level. I think now, because I don't have ties to anything I have to say, I think I've gotten much more confident in my writing and the speaking and the TV, and just sort of everyone, like, we have agency. Like, this is bad, but I'm not ready to throw in the towel for human species. I think that way about AI. Like, I know everyone's freaking out about it. It's like, and you all will have to figure out how we control it or monitor it. But one of the stories I have in the book is in disaster management, we study the zombie genre. So a lot of you are probably watching The Last of Us. Is that right? Is that what's it called? The Last of Us? Yeah. Yeah. I like watched one episode. I don't know how you do it. It was intense. And the zombie genre has changed, as those of you who are watching this or who watch any of them. It used to be in the 50s and 60s, the zombies came and humankind perished, right? It's like oh, this bad thing, we have no agency. And the interesting thing about the zombie genre now, so I think about this in terms of AI, is we're now several generations later. So The Last of Us starts, remember, a generation ago, or 20 years ago, the opening scene. And the human species has adapted, right? They're learning how to live. And I have great faith that we can continue to do that we can adapt and learn and struggle for our survival, whatever the threat is.
It's interesting. I wanted to combine this sort of discussion about politics with the discussion with the media.
Yeah.
Clarice Rosedale asked about your CNN career, and I'm wondering, I have a specific question that sort of derives from that, which is that we're living in another age of intense political polarization, where everything is a football, or contested terrain, a point of conflict and alienation. And then also we're living in a world where the media culture is changing. And so but one of the things about Homeland Security, at least initially post 9/11, was this was a terrain of policy that Democrats and Republicans, people in different ideological perspectives, could work together on. And so I'm wondering, in an age of political polarization where the media can be at times sensational and kind of out of control and misrepresenting things like disasters, how do you function as someone who does your work in terms of security, homeland security, and disaster response? How do you navigate a terrain where politics and media are often out of control and not helping?
And how do you, I've thought about this a lot, and I wouldn't say I'm always perfect, because sometimes you can get swept in, right? And you're angry about the pace of rage is, it is as much a slogan as it is a reminder to myself, right? That you can get into the scrum of things and not be able to see the what's going on right around, including enjoying family and friends and all the things that we were put on this earth for, and not being on Twitter or being on Twitter was not one of them. I'm quite confident of that. So a couple things that I think I was saying earlier, when you think about your careers and how you think about it, I do think me sticking to my lane has helped, because it's okay. Well, she has an authoritative voice in this lane. Trust me, I have major opinions, and not, about, I have opinions about reproductive health and Meghan Markle and whatever. I just have strong opinions about all of them. I think that's not where my value is. And so you can make yourself part of the scrum unwittingly, a part of the extremes, if you just sort of, okay, well, what is my expertise, and sort of thinking about how do I do that, whether it's, teaching in a high school or whatever you all think about in terms of your fields and careers. But I'm not always perfect. The other thing is, I think differently about different media. So because of the noise. So I have been convinced that the way to deal with disinformation is what we call in the media the truth sandwich, right? So there's a thing that says, something that says, let me think of whatever. Donald Trump was endorsed by the Pope. That was one of the disinformations in 2016. Right, that was being pushed out on Facebook and in Pennsylvania, a Catholic state, or a swing state. So when it's reported on, right, in the old days before we knew how to do this, it would be Donald, it would be so-and-so says Donald Trump was endorsed by the Pope. Everyone knows why this is ridiculous, right? Because the Pope does not endorse in presidential campaigns. But it was a piece. What we do now is truth, describe the falsity, truth. Right. So you begin with, right, this is factually inaccurate.
The Pope doesn't endorse presidential.
But here's the allegation, and then the truth. So you call it a truth sandwich. And you see reporters starting to do that. Headlines still get it wrong, but reporters start to do that. So I think about each medium I'm on, about how can I do that. Radio, I do a radio segment once a week. Radio is the easiest to do that because you can talk like I'm talking now, full sentences, paragraphs, whatever.
And you control the content.
And you control the content and you can steer it. The Atlantic, where I'm a contributor writer, so it's 800 to 900 words. Those are very much like, in those of you interested in column writing or thinking about, that kind of narrative. It is, I don't need to be the smartest person in the room. It is, what is my point? Why am I here? And why are you reading this? And then why am I the authoritative voice to do it? And I think about that all the time, right? It's just like, the people don't need to read me about this person and that outrage and this and that. This is why am I the authoritative voice? And then CNN is just different. I have, it is, cable is still a strong presence. Most of you probably don't do cable. CNN's going through a transition that I actually like. I think it had gotten too political. I think people turned to CNN during the war, during the hurricane. This is when, this is when people want the visuals. We can throw a lot of resources. For CNN, I think, what can I say in 30 seconds that is going to make a viewer think about something differly? So I don't, right, or learn something. So I don't need to be like, oh, this person's horrible, and oh, why didn't we do that? Whatever. It is just, when I'm on about guns, it is, I will often project, like, I'm not going to solve the gun crisis. Let me just tell you why this particular gun matters to me.
Yeah.
It's because I have no runway. As a crisis man, I have no runway. I have nothing I can do for you because it's going to kill this many people in 10 seconds. And even if, forget Uvalde, even if the police come in 2 minutes, too late.
Yeah. I was drawn to speaking of what you were just referring to. I love this chapter. Ideology is for losers in your book, Security Mom, My Life Protecting the Home and the Homeland. And I wanted to use this book, the title Security Mom, and because you do such a I think, really remarkable job in both of these books and in your work more generally of weaving, right, the personal and the political and the policy. You're very, very good at that. And there were a number of questions here that I really stuck out to me about personal stuff.
Okay, that's fine.
Right. About
I wouldn't write a book called Security Mom if I wasn't comfortable talking about it.
Right, exactly. And so Hillary Morris says, is it difficult to balance your personal life with your job, and what has helped you to succeed? Sort of some life advice for an aspiring.
Okay, good. Well, first of all, who was that?
Hillary.
Hillary. I mean, you have no idea. Like, I mean, in the sense, I don't mean to be, it's like the trajectories of life are, some of it's randomness, being ready for the randomness. Some of it is things you didn't envision you would do. I grew up in California, by the way, if you like, so I grew up surfing, playing beach volleyball, like that I suffer through New England Februaries every year is like a sign something went horribly wrong. My husband says I have only 2 bad moods. I'm a pretty upbeat person. He says you have 2 bad moods: before coffee in the morning and February, all of it. And so life has this thing. I don't bring in this child did that. I'm very protective of my kids in terms of, especially now that they're older. You will never see a picture of them. You haven't seen a picture. I mean, I don't put pictures up. I'm not look at these. I'll make jokes about them online. But they have their own life of which they can build on their own. But the experience of parenting, especially when they were younger, and the experience of being a secretary of Homeland Security here, an assistant secretary at DHS, those experiences were unbelievably familiar in how I think about things and how one should think about things. How do you minimize risk to your kids? How do you minimize risk to your community? It's the same question. How do you prepare for something bad? How do you, at home or elsewhere? But also that I thought it was a way to relate it to people who, if you said, this is a book about Homeland Security, they would be like, later. Right. But this is a book about a woman who'd ever. So how do I balance it? Some of it is the flukishness of careers. We were talking about this. So I travel the globe. My husband is a judge. He was a Harvard law professor. He's a judge now in the First Circuit. He does not have travel part of his work. It's little things like this that you just can't plan on right now. But it is, 3 kids, someone's got to be home, and it wasn't me. And I was comfortable with that. And he was, trust me, if you met him, he lives home. Like it's like, I'll say we're going out Friday night. And he's like, exactly. Our house is so comfortable. And so that works really well. So one is just how are you balancing whoever your partner is, if you have a partner, with the kids, and that we never planned. It was just the nature of our careers. The other is just a comfort level with, as I said, I'm not, one of the things that you do is I'm not a perfectionist.
Yeah.
It is, I don't know why not. My parents are Lebanese immigrants. They are a traditional immigrant story of which their kids are achieving things that they couldn't have imagined, and my kids will likely achieve. You know, in other words, we are that story from a part of the world that's not ideal, and so anyone who knows the Lebanese, you know, we say we dance our way through the Civil War. I mean, they're just like, you know, my parents are just like, oh, great, you know, like it's just a way of thinking, and I think I think that's how I was raised. I don't think you can earn that, but I will say, or learn that, or you can try to learn it. I will say, for women in particular, but but this is probably going to be less true for your generation, where I think the roles are so fluid in a good way in terms of what people are doing, and the opportunities. I was reminded just last week, I graduated from Harvard. I got a Harvard Radcliffe degree. Like that's how recent it was. Yeah. This thing, like, it's like, oh, okay, we're going to still, you know, the sort of, you know, it's like this idea that I couldn't just get a Harvard, like this is all so recent, all these changes. And I think you all will benefit from them, as well as keep pushing the envelope as you should. But I think the one thing is I don't stew. If you can't tell, that is not part of my personality. That is just, if you make a decision, make it, then course correct. But like and I think for working mothers, or for mothers or fathers, I'm not being fair here, but just like, you know, is this good for my kid? Is this not good for my kid? Like what, like at some stage, it's like you can calculate yourself into paralysis. And I think part of, I try to teach my students is, especially in crisis management, and they are related, is you have to make decisions with limited information. You have no idea what the cause was. Think my first alert for the Boston Marathon is, we think a generator blew. Now that changes 4 minutes later. You are making decisions without clarity. And I think that's also true of life. You're just going to make decisions. So my kids are also completely screwed up, if you have to. No, I'm joking.
Your kids are lovely. Your kids are lovely.
They're awesome. They are. I've only got one left in the house, so I'm going through something now as he heads out. But they, and none of them are interested in this field. None of them. I mean, they are much more different. But if I taught them anything, I think it is that they, you know, that your life, and you know that, and our students do this, is like, you know, well, what's my job? As if like you're going to have that job for longer than 18, 24 months. Your first job, my first job I had for like, you know, a year, you know, it's, and is maybe a little bit comfort of sort of writing it as you go along, which I hopefully they take past college.
I wanted to, this is the last question because we're almost at time. I was struck by a number of the more personal questions, and Kelly Costello says, how does dealing with crisis and such different topics and difficult topics on a daily basis affect your mental state? I wanted to put that into a final question that, you know, my political hero, Harvey Milk, says you got to give them hope.
Yes.
And I think that sometimes when you're dealing with disasters and you're dealing with homeland security and all the things that we've been talking about, there is a tendency, I would imagine some people would have a hard time not descending into some kind of despair or even paralysis. And for me, I'm always trying to figure out, how do we get out of or extricate ourselves from the emotional location of despair and paralysis and move to a place of sort of empathy and hope. And I'm wondering if you could talk maybe a little bit about how you do that, because you are someone who, when you're around you feel very hopeful, positive energy. You're not someone that, you're not Eeyore, you don't bring the room down. And how do you do that? I mean, how do you do, and how do they do it? Because this is a generation that's dealing with a lot of stuff.
And their peers, you know, I have one kid who did junior and senior year at home because of COVID. I think that hit him the hard. My daughter left college, so she just decided to sort of extend her runway, which I thought was right. And the younger one didn't feel it as much as I think the middle one. So I know what you're going to say. So I'm going to end with 2 points, because one is have faith in our species. Right. I mean, in other words, we do have a capacity to adapt. We are not passive observers. Things are bad. Things may not change as fast as you want. Things may take longer than you want. In my lifetime, we the changes in social norms about everything from gender and LGBTQ to, to issues around race and everything. And I feel like I was born in the modern time, but just the changes that society can go through if you just give enough time. That is, I still have faith in it. And I'll tell you why I have faith in it. This will be my end story. So the title of the book, The Devil Never Sleeps, is not intended, I mean, it's to capture your attention, right? The devil's going to come back, actually comes from a woman who could not be more different than me in the terms of hope. I mean, in terms of the divides that can just ground us, like, why aren't things changing in the way that we want them to change? Or maybe they're changing too fast, right? In some ways. So I get deployed to disasters for whatever role I'm in often. Joplin, Missouri is about as conservative we talk about conservative in Massachusetts. You go out to Missouri, conservative as you can imagine. Joplin, Missouri gets hit by a tornado. It's a small community. 120 people die in 19 seconds. So those of you who saw pictures of the tornadoes this weekend, we call the tornadoes a bad word, because tornadoes come with little warning, but their destruction is so narrow. So in Joplin, the tornado comes down 20th Street. And if you were on 20th Street, you were dead, right? I mean, in other words, it is so fast. If you were on 19th or 21st, chances are you were alive. So this town is devastated. And we are the Obama people, and we come in and, it's like oil and, this devout conservative rural area and and us, but you work together and you overcome the divides. I'm then and get people the resources they need because your runway is short. I come back a year later for the anniversary, and the rebuilding of Joplin is being led by a woman named Jane Cage, who gave me the name for this. Jane is a very conservative, politically conservative, the Trump supporter now, wonderful woman, exceptionally devout. And she is leading getting Joplin ready for the next tornado. And she's doing it with her sticky notes. She goes around town and asks people questions. And then she had some community role with rebuilding Joplin. And I said to her, the question you asked me is like, look around, look what happened to you. How are you like this? She's happy. She's whatever. And it was I think about faith, and it was a way of thinking about her faith that I found very appealing, because it wasn't passive, like, oh, God does this to us, and us poor people, and, poor people in the sense, devastated people in Joplin, Missouri, and sitting there passively. God gave us agency, she basically said, to kick ass, sorry for the French, but basically that's what she said, which is to go at, to make us better. So I said, so she then ends this monologue, which is in the book, of which she's viewing her faith as tactical, right? It's not Jobian passive. This is what we're here for. And she says, I live in Missouri. There's going to be more tornadoes. The devil never sleeps, but he only wins if we don't do better next time. Mm. And I think about that. And that's when I learned, that's when I think about, how do we fail safer? Because I can't promise you that world where that's not going to happen. And that gives me hope, right? Because we're in it for, there'll be another day for another fight. Yes. And so, yes. And I run.
Thank you for making us safer. Thanks, everybody.